At my daughter Emily's wedding, her fiancé Daniel shoved my face straight into the cake and laughed, "Go ahead, try the dessert." I could feel anger boiling inside me as frosting slid down my chin. The first thought that hit me wasn't embarrassment, but my diabetes. Then one of the guests suddenly pointed my way and blurted out, "He's a billionaire." In an instant, Daniel's smug grin vanished. His face drained of color. He knew right then he'd crossed a line, and that he'd pay for it. "Of course, we understand your financial limitations," Richard Carter said, slicing through my polite comment about wedding venues like a knife through paper. The chandelier above our table seemed to dim as the weight of his words landed. Conversations around us carried on, but at our table the silence was sharp, the kind that follows a public execution. Linda's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Daniel hid a smirk behind his wine glass. Emily's cheeks turned bright red. I had been describing how beautiful a simple outdoor wedding could be, mentioning a park pavilion I'd once seen. Modest, elegant, apparently too modest for the Carters. "Dad always finds a way to make things work with what we've got," Emily jumped in quickly, her voice pitched a little higher than usual. "He's always been resourceful." Resourceful? Richard rolled the word around in his mouth like fine wine. "That's one way to describe it." The waiter glided by quietly, topping off water glasses without drawing attention. I caught the sparkle of the crystal in the light and couldn't help but wonder what this dinner was costing by the minute. Menus without prices, never a good sign. When we'd ordered, I'd chosen the salmon, while everyone else went for the aged steaks, each one probably worth more than an average family's groceries for a week. "Don't worry about the wedding expenses," Linda said with a smile as sharp as the diamonds in her ears. "We completely understand your situation." My situation, spoken like poverty, was some medical condition that required pity. Daniel leaned back, his tailored suit stretching across his chest. "We've got connections with the best venues in Napa Valley, especially the Rosewood Estate. I doubt you've even heard of it." "No, I haven't," I admitted. $50,000 minimum just to book the place." He said it casually, watching for my reaction. "But don't stress about contributing, Robert. We'll handle it." The small gift box in my jacket pocket suddenly felt heavy. Inside was a vintage silver locket I'd found at an estate sale, beautiful, genuine, with room for 2 photos. It cost me exactly $37. Meaningful to me, but in this setting it felt like pocket change at a luxury car showroom. Emily touched my arm gently. "Dad, you don't have to. I always provide for my family," I told her quietly. Richard let out a dry laugh. "Of course you do. In your own way." The dessert course arrived, massive plates carrying chocolate creations dusted with gold leaf, more like art installations than food. I thought about my old kitchen table back home in Cleveland, scarred with scratches from years of Emily doing homework there. The same table where we'd celebrated her college acceptance with nothing fancier than a grocery store cake. Daniel leaned forward, grinning. "We're planning quite the bachelor party. Thinking a private yacht. You're welcome to come along, if you can get the time off work." Time off work. I hadn't asked anyone for that in 15 years. Linda dabbed her lips with a napkin that probably cost more than my shirt. "Robert, what is it you do again?" "Investment consulting," I answered. True, though it hardly told the whole story. "How lovely. Small accounts, I imagine." The check arrived in a leather folder. Richard didn't even glance at the total before sliding in his black card. The waiter's grateful nod hinted at a tip larger than my monthly grocery bill. Outside, the valet pulled cars around. The Carter's black Mercedes gleamed under the lights like a predator. My old Toyota Camry looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. "See you soon," Richard called out from his open window. "We'll handle the real planning." I helped Emily into the passenger seat. Her silence hung between us like a bridge neither of us could cross. The highway stretched out ahead, headlights sweeping across our faces in steady intervals. Emily fidgeted with her purse strap, the leather squeaking softly in the quiet. The restaurant was beautiful, she finally said. Those chandeliers must have cost a fortune. I tightened my grip on the wheel as the exit signs blurred past. 20 minutes until home. 20 minutes to decide if I was going to let this night's humiliation pass unanswered. Emily, I said, my voice rougher than I intended, we need to talk about Daniel. Her shoulders stiffened. What about him? The way he talked tonight. The way his family treats. Treats who? She cut in. You, I said firmly. She turned to me. Dad, they're just used to money. They don't mean anything by it. A truck roared past us, its headlights lighting up the car. In that flash, I saw my daughter defending a man who had let his father mock me over and over, and who had smiled while it happened. Character doesn't change with the size of your bank account, I told her. Tonight showed me exactly who they are. You barely know them. I know enough, I said. I've seen how Daniel treats waiters, how he talks about people he thinks are beneath him. Tonight, that included me. Emily gave a sharp laugh. You're being paranoid, and honestly, a little controlling. That word hit harder than any insult Richard had thrown my way. Controlling. As if wanting better for my daughter meant taking away her freedom. I'm not trying to control you, I said carefully. I'm trying to keep you from making a mistake you'll regret for decades. A mistake, she snapped. My engagement is a mistake. Your engagement to him might be. Stop the car. What? Stop the car right now. Her face glowed in the dashboard lights, filled with hurt and anger. This wasn't the conversation I'd wanted, but it was the one we were having. Emily, let's just pull over. Now, Dad. I flicked on the signal and eased onto the shoulder. Before we even stopped, she was unbuckling her seatbelt. You don't understand anything, she said, grabbing her purse. You don't understand Daniel, his family, you don't understand me. Sweetheart, please. What I need from my father is support, not judgment. I need someone who trusts me to make my own choices. She shoved the door open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of exhaust and distant rain. Where are you going? I asked. Anywhere but here. She stepped out, then leaned down to glare at me. I'll call Daniel to pick me up. At least he doesn't think I'm too stupid to live my own life. The door slammed. I watched her walk toward a gas station, her heels clicking against the asphalt. My phone buzzed, she was already texting him. Already choosing him over me. I sat there until I saw her step inside the fluorescent-lit convenience store, safe enough. Then I pulled back onto the highway, the radio playing softly, my passenger seat painfully empty. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Cleveland, even my modest two-story house looked smaller. The porch light cast familiar shadows across the little garden where Emily had helped me plant tomatoes every spring since she was 8. A week ago, everything had been different. Just a week ago, I'd been sitting at that same kitchen table with a cup of coffee steaming beside the morning paper. April 22nd had started like any other Tuesday. Quiet. Predictable. Comfortable. The house had smelled like French roast and the faint lavender soap Emily always liked when she visited. Then the phone rang. 8:47 a.m. sharp. Dad, her voice bubbled through the speaker. I have news. I'd set my coffee down, already smiling at her excitement. Good news, I hope. The best, she said. Daniel proposed. Her joy was infectious. Whatever doubts I'd had about the guy seemed to vanish, at least for that moment. She deserved to be loved. She deserved love. She deserved someone who would truly cherish her. Tell me everything, I said, leaning back in my chair. It was perfect, Dad. He took me to Boston Common, to that spot by the pond where we had our very first date. He got down on one knee right there on the path, with joggers and dog walkers watching. The ring is gorgeous, it's a princess-cut diamond that sparkles like crazy. I could picture it, Emily's face glowing with happiness, strangers probably applauding around her. The image warmed me, even though deep down my doubts about Daniel hadn't disappeared. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. There's going to be an engagement dinner next week, she continued. You'll finally meet his parents properly. They're wonderful people, Dad. His father built their company from nothing. You'll have plenty to talk about. That's when I made the decision that would eventually lead to tonight's disaster. Emily, before we meet them, I need to ask you for a favor. Anything. I got up and started pacing toward the window, looking out at my neighbor's plain little lawn. I'd like to keep my financial situation private. Let them think I'm just an ordinary working man. There was a long pause on the line. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of confusion. Why would you want that? Because I need to know who they really are. Money changes how people treat you. If they think I'm wealthy, they'll put on a show. But if they believe I'm just average, they'll act honestly. And if that honesty is ugly, then we'll know exactly what kind of people they are. She was silent for a long time. Dad, that sounds a little manipulative, doesn't it? It's practical, I told her. Real character shows when people think there's nothing to gain by being kind. Now, sitting in my driveway with the fight from earlier still fresh in my memory, I wasn't sure if I'd been wise or just stubborn. My modest Cleveland home sat quietly around me. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, nothing special. The investment statements locked in my desk drawer painted a very different picture, but those numbers had never mattered much to me. Inside, the walls were lined with family photos. Emily at her college graduation. Emily on Christmas morning surrounded by simple gifts. Emily laughing at one of my corny jokes, her face lit up with pure joy. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Tomorrow might be the start of a long silence between us. I'd asked her to help hide my wealth, and in doing so, I'd risked losing the only thing that really mattered, her. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to protect her from people who valued money more than character, I'd pushed her straight into their arms. As I looked around my home, its familiar simplicity suddenly felt heavier. Every modest piece of furniture, every budget-conscious choice reminded me of decisions I'd made years ago, long before Emily, before the money that changed my life but not how I chose to live it. The living room hadn't changed in 15 years. Same old couch. Same wooden coffee table, scarred with rings from countless nights of reading together. The only things of real value were hidden away, the stock statements in my desk, the emergency fund big enough to buy half the neighborhood. I settled into my favorite chair, the one Emily and I had picked out at a second-hand store when she was 16. Dad, this one's perfect, she'd said, running her hands across the worn leather. It looks like it has stories to tell. Stories, like the one I'd never told her about 1995. I was 28 then, crammed into a studio apartment in Seattle that barely counted as a place to live. The Murphy bed folded down and took up half the floor. My kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge that hummed like it was dying. Every morning, I walked 12 blocks to the accounting firm rather than spend $2 on the bus. My savings account held exactly $5,027. I knew because I checked it obsessively, like other people check their pulse. $5,000, that was 2 years of living like a monk, eating nothing but pasta and canned vegetables, rotating through the same 3 shirts. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I was walking back from a lunch that was nothing more than a day-old bagel when 2 young guys stopped me outside a coffee shop. "Excuse me," the taller one said. "Are you an accountant?" They looked barely old enough to vote. The shorter one clutched a beat-up laptop like it was a life preserver. Both of them practically radiated excitement. "I work in accounting," I said cautiously. "We need someone to look at our numbers," the tall one explained. "Someone who gets money." Over cheap coffee in my building's lobby, they laid out their idea, a software platform that would change how people shared information. The internet was still young back then, dial-up modems and basic websites. Their idea seemed both impossible and inevitable. "We just need some seed money," the shorter one said, his hands shaking. "Not much. $5,000 would cover office space, some better equipment, maybe even food that isn't ramen." 5,000. My entire safety net. I should have said no. I should have explained that losing it would send me crawling back to my parents' basement in Ohio. But instead, I started asking questions, about their research, their projections, their competition. And they had answers. Good ones. More than that, they had something I recognized in my own reflection: hunger. Not for luxury, but for the chance to build something that mattered. "If I invest," I said slowly, "I want 10% equity." "Deal." No hesitation. Just a handshake in a lobby that smelled like cheap carpet and broken dreams. 6 months later, they landed their first big client. 18 months after that, a tech giant bought them out for $42 million. My 5,000 turned into $4.2 million overnight. I still remember the call, the shock, the realization that money was just a tool, not the destination. I'd seen what wealth did to people. I'd watched lottery winners and trust fund kids crumble in my accounting work. Money didn't create character, it revealed it. That's why I kept living simply. Why I raised Emily to value hard work over wealth, character over capital. Why I asked her to hide my financial status from the Carters. On the table beside me sat a photo of Emily at her college graduation, smiling in front of a modest little restaurant where we'd celebrated. She never knew her education had been paid for with stock dividends. She never knew her father could have bought her anything she wanted. And now, I had to decide if holding on to that philosophy was worth losing her forever. The next morning didn't make things clearer. I woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare, that Emily hadn't chosen Daniel over me in a gas station parking lot. But my phone showed no missed calls. No texts. No apologies. Day one felt bearable. Emily just needed time. I kept my routine: coffee at 6:30, newspaper at 7, market reports at 8. Every buzz of my phone sent a surge of hope through me. But it was always emails about portfolios that suddenly felt meaningless. She deserved love. She deserved someone who would truly cherish her. "Tell me everything," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It was perfect, Dad." He took me to Boston Common, to that spot by the pond where we had our very first date. He got down on one knee right there on the path, with joggers and dog walkers passing by. "The ring is gorgeous, it's a princess-cut diamond that catches the light like crazy." I pictured it so clearly, Emily glowing with happiness, strangers clapping around her. The thought warmed me, even though my doubts about Daniel hadn't gone away. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. There's going to be an engagement dinner next week," she said. "You'll finally get to meet his parents properly. They're wonderful people. His father built their company from nothing. You'll have so much to talk about." That's when I made the decision that would eventually set up tonight's disaster. "Emily, before we meet them, I need a favor." "Anything." I stood up and paced to the window, staring at my neighbor's plain little lawn. "I'd like to keep my finances private. Let them think I'm just a regular working man." There was a long pause. Finally she said, her voice tinged with confusion, "Why would you want that?" "Because I need to know who they really are. Money changes people. If they think I'm wealthy, they'll put on a show. But if they believe I'm ordinary, they'll act honestly. And if that honesty turns out to be ugly, then at least we'll know the truth." Silence stretched again. Then she whispered, "Dad, that sounds a little manipulative, doesn't it?" "It's practical," I said. "Real character shows when people think there's nothing to gain from kindness." Now, sitting in my driveway with the argument from earlier still fresh, I wasn't sure if I'd been wise, or just stubborn. My modest Cleveland home stood quiet. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, nothing remarkable. The stock statements hidden in my desk drawer painted a very different picture, but those numbers had never meant much to me. Inside, the hallway walls were lined with family photos. Emily at her college graduation. Emily on Christmas morning, surrounded by simple gifts. Emily laughing at one of my old jokes, her face full of uncomplicated joy. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Tomorrow might be the start of a long silence between us. I'd asked her to help hide my wealth, and in doing so, I risked losing the one thing that mattered most, her. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to shield her from people who worshipped money, I'd driven her right into their arms. I looked around my home and it suddenly felt heavier. Every piece of modest furniture, every frugal choice reminded me of decisions made long before Emily, long before money came into the picture. The living room hadn't changed in 15 years. Same old couch. Same wooden coffee table marked with rings from countless nights we'd spent together. The only valuables were hidden away, the investments, the emergency fund big enough to buy half the block. I settled into my favorite chair, the one Emily had picked out with me at a second-hand store when she was 16. "Dad, this one's perfect," she'd said, running her hands over the worn leather. "It looks like it has stories to tell." Stories like the one I'd never told her about 1995. I was 28 then, crammed into a tiny studio apartment in Seattle that barely counted as a home. The Murphy bed folded down and filled half the space. My kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge that buzzed like it was dying. Every morning, I walked 12 blocks to the accounting firm instead of spending $2 on the bus. My savings account held exactly $5,027. I knew because I checked it constantly, like some people check their pulse. That money represented 2 years of living like a monk, pasta and canned vegetables for dinner, rotating through the same 3 shirts. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I was walking back from a lunch of a day-old bagel when 2 young guys stopped me outside a coffee shop. "Excuse me," the taller one asked, "are you an accountant?" They looked barely old enough to vote. The shorter one clutched a beat-up laptop like it was a lifeline. Both of them practically buzzed with excitement. "I work in accounting," I said carefully. "We need someone to look over our numbers," the tall one explained. "Someone who really understands money." Over terrible coffee in my lobby, they explained their vision, a software platform that could change how people shared information. The internet was still in its infancy back then, dial-up modems, bare-bones websites. Their idea seemed both impossible and inevitable. "We just need a little seed money," the shorter one said, his hands trembling. "Not much. $5,000 would cover office space, some better equipment, maybe food that isn't ramen. 5,000. My entire safety net." I should have said no. Losing it would mean moving back to my parents' basement in Ohio. But instead, I asked questions, about research, projections, competition. And they had answers. Good ones. More than that, they had something I recognized in myself: hunger. Not for luxury, but for the chance to build something real. "If I invest," I said slowly, "I want 10% equity." "Deal." No hesitation. Just a handshake in a lobby that smelled like cheap carpet and broken dreams. 6 months later, they signed their first major client. 18 months after that, a tech giant bought them out for $42 million. My 5,000 had become 4.2 million overnight. I can still remember the phone call. The shock. The realization that money was just a tool, not the finish line. I'd seen what wealth did to people. In my accounting work, I'd watched lottery winners and trust fund kids fall apart. Money didn't create character, it exposed it. That's why I kept living simply. Why I raised Emily to value work over wealth, character over capital. Why I asked her to keep my finances hidden from the Carters. On the table beside me sat a photo of Emily at her graduation, smiling outside a modest restaurant where we'd celebrated. She had no idea her education was paid for with stock dividends. No idea I could have bought her anything she wanted. And now I had to decide if sticking to that philosophy was worth losing her forever. The next morning didn't make things any clearer. I woke up praying last night had been a nightmare, that Emily hadn't chosen Daniel over me at that gas station. But my phone showed no missed calls. No texts. No apologies. Day one felt survivable. She just needed time. I kept my routine, coffee at 6:30, newspaper at 7, market reports at 8. Each time my phone buzzed, hope surged through me. But it was always just portfolio emails that suddenly felt meaningless. Hope kept me going. It was like a powerful sedative. By 8 o'clock, I was dressed and standing in front of the mirror. Clean shave, careful grooming, a little splash of cologne Emily had given me last Christmas. I looked modest, but respectable, exactly what the Carters expected. A working man doing his best. You can do this, I told my reflection. No comments, no frowns, no disapproval. Just perfect behavior. The gift had taken some thought. Too expensive would raise suspicion. Too cheap might embarrass Emily. I finally settled on a crystal vase from the local shop, elegant but modest, $68. The shop owner wrapped it beautifully, tied a white ribbon around it, and added a small card. I'd written, "For the happy couple. Wishing you joy, love, and understanding in your marriage." Understanding, I muttered. If only they knew how much I already understood about their character. My phone buzzed with texts from old friends and neighbors, people who'd watched Emily grow up, people who remembered her first steps in this very hallway. They had no idea today might be the last time I'd walk her down any aisle. The drive to Napa Valley would take close to 2 hours in Saturday traffic. The ceremony started at 4, so I needed to leave by noon to make room for parking and pre-wedding photos. That left just enough time for a final check. Insulin pen in my jacket. Glucose tablets in my pocket. Gift receipt in my wallet. Phone fully charged. Everything a responsible father should have on his daughter's wedding day. I looked around my modest home one last time. If things went badly today, if I slipped, if I couldn't maintain the perfect image Emily needed, this might be my last peaceful morning here. Tomorrow could bring another month of silence, or worse. But there was still possibility. Maybe Daniel would surprise me. Maybe the joy of the day would soften the rough edges I'd seen at dinner. Maybe Emily would find happiness despite my doubts. I picked up the gift and my car keys. Time to find out which version of this day I was about to live. The Toyota started on the first try, as always. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, then pulled out of the driveway. The Rosewood estate in Napa looked like something from a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns stretched out in every direction. Bentleys and Mercedes glinted in the sun as they circled the grand driveway. My Toyota stuck out like a delivery truck among thoroughbreds. A valet approached, struggling to hide his surprise. "Sir, are you here for the Carter wedding?" "I'm the bride's father," I said. His expression softened into professional sympathy. "Of course, sir. Right this way." The entrance hall sparkled with chandeliers worth more than most houses. Towering floral arrangements stood like sculptures, every bloom flawless, every stem placed with precision. The air was thick with perfume and imported lilies. "Robert." Linda Carter's voice boomed across the marble foyer. "Everyone, this is Emily's father." 24 well-dressed guests turned to look me over. Their eyes scanned everything, the modest suit, the department store shoes, the gift that clearly wasn't from Tiffany's. Their polite smiles had the same pitying edge people reserve for charity cases. "How wonderful you could make it," Linda said. Richard Carter appeared at her side. "Yes. I know the drive from Cleveland, isn't it? Quite a distance in that little car of yours." The photographer swooped in, camera gear hanging from his neck. "Family photos in 5 minutes," he called. "Immediate family only," Linda clarified quickly. Then to me, "Robert, perhaps you could wait over there." Over there turned out to be the corner by the coat rack, away from the important people. I stood and watched as the Carters posed with Emily, their designer clothes perfectly coordinated. Daniel's groomsmen joined in, all Harvard ties and inherited confidence. A waiter circled with champagne on a silver tray. "Krug Classe d'Embonne," he announced. "Excellent vintage," someone murmured. "That's 300 a bottle," another whispered. "Only the best for our son's wedding," Richard declared loudly, looking straight at me. Of course, not everyone appreciates fine champagne. The ceremony seating offered another insult. The front rows gleamed with Carter business partners and society friends. I was directed to row 7, behind elderly relatives and plus ones. The bride's father, pushed to the cheap seats. "Beautiful venue," I said quietly to the woman beside me. "Oh yes," she whispered back. 50,000 just for the rental. Thank goodness the Carters could afford it. "I heard the bride's family," she trailed off, embarrassed. "Has very modest means," I finished for her. "Yes," she murmured. Daniel's best man came by handing out cigars. "Cuban," he bragged. "Saved for special occasions." His humidor skipped right past my row. During cocktail hour, I finally caught Emily for a moment. She looked radiant in silk and pearls, her smile glowing beneath carefully applied makeup. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you for being here, Dad. I know this isn't easy. It's your day. That's all that matters." She squeezed my hand. "Daniel's family means well. They're just particular about their traditions." Particular. Like excluding me from family photos and seating me with strangers. "I'm fine," I told her. "Go enjoy your reception." Dinner service began with a flourish. Waiters glided out in formation, carrying plates that looked like museum pieces. 5 courses, each more extravagant than the last. The wine pairings alone probably cost more than my monthly groceries. From my distant table, I watched the head table laugh and chatter. Daniel gestured broadly, entertaining his groomsmen. Every so often, he'd glance my way with the same smug smirk I remembered from our first meeting. Dessert appeared like a cathedral of sugar. A 5-tiered cake stood in the center, surrounded by chocolate sculptures and elaborate pastries. Guests crowded around, snapping photos from every angle. I stayed where I was. I sat back, watching from a distance as always. The dessert display looked more like a museum exhibit than food. In the center stood a towering 5-tier wedding cake, surrounded by chocolate sculptures that belonged behind glass, not on plates. Guests circled with their phones out, snapping pictures of every detail. I moved closer, careful, like the outsider I knew I was. The chocolate fountain bubbled like liquid wealth. Pastries glistened under gold leaf, lined up like jewelry in a showcase. Everything was built to impress. Nothing built for someone like me, someone with diabetes. A waiter caught my hesitation. "Can I help you, sir? Any sugar-free options?" "I'm diabetic." "Of course. Fresh fruit, a sugar-free chocolate mousse, and some almond cookies made with stevia." "Fruit sounds perfect," I said. "A simple request. Nothing strange about managing my health responsibly." Behind me, conversations carried on, vacation homes, stock portfolios, the usual wealthy small talk. All things I could afford, but never cared to join in. "What's that about diabetic options?" Daniel's voice cut through like a knife. He was weaving slightly, champagne making him sloppy. "I just asked about sugar-free," I explained. "Sugar-free?" He laughed too loud, making sure everyone heard. "Let me guess, you can't afford real medical care either." The chatter around us slowed. Heads turned. The air in the room shifted. I manage my condition just fine, I said evenly. Sure you do. Free clinics, discount meds. That's about your speed. His voice carried now, a performance for the room. But hey, at least you made it to the wedding, right? Even if you can't afford dessert. Daniel, what's going on? Emily's voice came from behind me. He smirked at her, proud of himself. Just helping your father figure out the menu. Apparently beggars really can be choosers. Beggars. The word cracked through the air. 50 guests froze. Waiters stopped mid-step. Even the chocolate fountain seemed to hush. That's enough, Emily snapped. Is it? Daniel stepped closer, his breath heavy with alcohol. His voice was sharp, cruel, unfiltered. I'm tired of pretending this is fine. Your father's a deadbeat, Emily. He's been embarrassing us since day one. He's not embarrassing anyone, she shot back. Look at him. Daniel waved his hand at me, my modest suit, my careful posture, the way I didn't belong in their glossy world. Look at this pathetic situation. And then, his hands moved. Fast. Drunk, but deliberate. My face slammed into the cake. It sounded like tearing silk. Frosting filled my eyes, my nose, my mouth. The 5 tiers collapsed around me, vanilla, chocolate, sugar, and humiliation mixing together. The room gasped. Nervous laughter. Camera flashes. A chair scraped across marble. Someone screamed. I straightened slowly, cake dripping from my hair, frosting sliding down my cheeks. It tasted good, honestly. Real butter, expensive vanilla. The kind of cake I could afford, but never would have bought. Through the sugar mess blurring my eyes, I caught the faces, shocked, entertained, disgusted. And Emily's face, horrified. What have you done? She whispered. Daniel grinned, proud, soaking in the attention. He had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The crack of Emily's hand across his face echoed like a gunshot. A red mark bloomed on his cheek. His smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief. How dare you, she screamed. Her voice carried across the marble, sharp and clear. How dare you lay a hand on my father? I kept wiping the frosting from my eyes, stunned but tasting every word. Guests circled closer, phones raised high, hungry to record the scandal. Emily, calm down, Daniel stammered, touching his cheek. It was just. Just what? She cut him off. Just assault. Just humiliating the man who raised me. Enough. The word thundered across the room. It came from George Anderson, rising from table 12. His silver hair caught the chandelier light as he stepped forward. He didn't need to shout. His presence was enough. The room hushed. Ladies and gentlemen, George said, his voice carrying boardroom authority. Allow me to properly introduce Robert Miller. Murmurs rippled instantly through the crowd. Some of you may recognize him, George went on, his gaze locked with mine, steady and supportive. Robert was the founding investor in Westbridge Technologies. Gasps. Guests shifted. Suddenly, people were listening. Robert is one of America's most successful private investors, George continued. He took risks early, invested in companies that changed the digital world. His net worth today, George paused for effect, well north of $1 billion. The room erupted in whispers. Heads turned toward me, then back to Daniel. That's Robert Miller, a woman near table 8 gasped. The Robert Miller, another guest muttered. I knew he looked familiar, someone else said. He's legendary in Seattle. The man who turned $5,000 into millions. I straightened my cake-stained jacket and gave George a small nod. Recognition spread like wildfire. Business ties, investment stories, whispered respect, all flooding the room. The Carters' 3 million looked like pocket change now. Daniel's face went pale. Behind him, Richard and Linda stood frozen, caught somewhere between horror and realization. But he drives a Toyota," Linda whispered. "He lives in Cleveland," Richard added weakly. George gave a thin smile. "Exactly. Robert understands something your family never did. Money doesn't define character. Character defines how you treat people, no matter what you think they're worth." The circle around us tightened. Some guests looked ashamed, others thrilled to be front-row witnesses to the collapse of the Carter family's illusion. Daniel opened his mouth once. Twice. Nothing came out. Like a fish out of water, gasping in silence. The stares burned into me. The same people who had ignored me an hour ago now looked on with a mix of respect and shame. The Carters finally started moving toward me, panic in their eyes as their social instincts caught up to the disaster. "Theodore, please," Richard reached me first, desperation barely hidden under his businessman's polish. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding." I brushed cake crumbs from my sleeve, standing as calm as I'd been all evening. Around us, the guests had formed a silent circle, like spectators in an amphitheater. "Misunderstanding?" I asked quietly. "Your son just assaulted me in front of 200 witnesses. Which part did I get wrong?" Daniel stumbled forward, panic and champagne making him clumsy. "Mr. Harrington, sir, I didn't know. If I'd realized." "Realized what?" "That I might have money." I shook my head slowly. "So assault is fine if the victim is poor?" "And no, that's not," his words tangled uselessly. Sweat beaded at his temples. Linda slid in beside him, all charm and control, her voice sugar-coated. "Theodore, surely we can put this incident behind us. Families argue at weddings. Emotions run high. Family disagreements." I repeated. "Is that what you call months of humiliation? Being excluded from photos? And your son's violence?" "We apologize," Richard cut in quickly, his tone switching to negotiation. "Completely. Unreservedly. Let's start fresh. Clean slate." The same words Emily had once used to heal our rift. But his version carried no warmth. Only calculation. "Start fresh." I mused aloud. "Now that you know I have money." "Your financial status has nothing to do with this," Linda insisted, her voice pitched too high. George Anderson laughed, sharp and merciless. "Madam, that's all it had to do with. You mocked him when you thought he was poor. Now you beg friendship because he's rich." "That's not true." Daniel blurted, desperate. "I'd have treated him the same either way." "Really?" I asked softly. "The same way you treated the waiters tonight? The valet? The housekeepers?" Daniel's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. "Your character," I told him, "was revealed tonight. Not by what you did to a wealthy man. By how you acted when you thought there would be no consequences." Richard tried again, his voice oily. "Business aside, personal aside, we're family now. We need to work together." "Family," I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. "You've taught your son that money decides a person's worth. That poverty justifies cruelty. That wealth excuses anything." I brushed the last frosting from my collar. "You want a fresh start? Fine. Here's mine, I'm leaving." "You can't." Linda's voice cracked with desperation. "Think of Emily. Think of the opportunities. What we could accomplish together." "Opportunities?" I shook my head. "Even now, you're counting profits. I'm thinking of Emily. She deserves better than a family that measures love in dollars." Daniel grabbed my arm. "Wait, I can change. I'll be better, I swear." I looked down at his hand gripping my sleeve. Then into his eyes. You're 30 years old. This is who you are. The crowd parted as I walked out. Whispers followed me like a tide. Behind me, the carters' voices grew frantic, but their words meant nothing. They had already shown me who they were. The evening air hit me like absolution. I stepped out into the golden light, toward my modest Toyota among the abandoned luxury cars. Then, footsteps. Running. Dad, wait. I turned. Emily was chasing me, lifting her wedding dress off the asphalt, silk trailing, hair undone, makeup streaked with tears. Sweetheart, I said softly, go back inside. It's your wedding. She stopped in front of me, breathless. No. Not anymore. We stood in the fading light, father and daughter, separated for months, now face to face. Her gown had cost more than most cars. My suit was ruined with frosting that cost more than most dinners. I'm so sorry, she whispered. You were right. About everything, about Daniel, about his family, about what money does to people. I'm sorry too, I said. I should have told you the truth from the start. Why didn't you? I glanced toward the ocean beyond the gardens. Because I wanted you to be loved for you, not for what I have. I wanted your relationships to be genuine, like ours has always been. The words hung between us, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Our bond is real, I finally admitted. It had survived wealth, hardship, arguments, and time apart. And tonight proved it again. Emily stepped closer, her hand finding mine. I was so mad at you for not trusting my judgment for 2 whole months, I confessed. But you saw it. You understood what I couldn't. Yeah, she said softly. I saw what I was scared to face. Sometimes being right doesn't feel like winning. She laughed, though it came out more like a shaky sigh. I literally ran out of my own wedding reception to chase you across the parking lot in this $20,000 dress. $20,000. I raised an eyebrow. For that much, it should have had sneakers included. Her laugh this time was genuine. Take me home, Dad. What about the reception? The guests? What about them? Let Daniel explain to his friends why I vanished. They can handle their own little social disaster. I looked at my daughter in her extravagant dress, standing beside my 10-year-old Honda Accord. Neither of us missed the irony. You sure about this? I asked. I've never been more certain about anything, she said. I opened the passenger door for her, and she carefully folded all that silk into the modest car. As I went around to the driver's side, I noticed wedding guests starting to leave the pavilion, probably wondering where the bride went. Where to? I asked as I started the engine. Home, she said simply. Our home. Yes. Our home. The drive back to Cleveland passed familiar streets, past the places where I'd raised her, the life we built around values instead of money. The late afternoon sun turned everything golden, even the modest blocks felt magical. I get it now, Emily said quietly as we crossed the bridge toward our neighborhood. I understand why you live the way you do, why you never flaunt money. Money's just a tool, I said. It's not who you are, not a measure of worth. It's just a way to shape the life you actually want. And what life is that? She asked. I pulled into our driveway, looking at the simple house where I'd raised my daughter to be strong, independent, and kind. This one? She asked. Exactly this one, I said. We sat in the car for a moment, watching the sun sink behind our neighborhood. Simple homes, small lawns, relationships built on character, not cash. Come on, I said finally. Let's go inside. I'll make coffee, and we'll figure out what's next. Together, we walked toward the front door of the little house that had always been rich in everything that truly mattered.